Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
And I'm Robert.
And today we're talking about why do games fail? Well, what have you been up to this past week? Tell me about it.
Well, there was actually, for me anyway, a good chunk of stuff. However, I would be remiss to say that Game of Thrones, no spoilers here for me, because I know that's been a problem. I enjoyed,
we talked about that when you were gone.
I understand.
Season recap.
There's a statute of limitations.
I enjoyed the things that happened, but the manner in which they were presented and happening was exceedingly troublesome to me, and I hope that the developers/producers of the show quit making excuses and rationales as to why there are legitimate complaints about why suddenly the show is so different, and that they can all but get away with it. I think they're wrong, and I hope it's better next season. Just because I have enjoyed the show, even though it's just like a more sexy and violent soap opera, and it takes forever to get anything done. But it's a good show. It's very entertaining, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing it wrap up very professionally, very nicely, bigly, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we'll definitely wrap up.
I think for me, the writing and the visuals are as good as ever.
Yeah.
Really, like some of the scenes this season with like the Dothraki riding over the hills and stuff is strong. But the like.
Oh, spoiler.
Oh, whoa, wait. But there's like weird just story plot choices that I don't. It's the thing would be is like if there was no way for you to do this outside the way you did it, and it creates some awkward stuff. I get it. Like sometimes. You just got to get where you need to get.
It feels like they choose awkward stuff.
But it doesn't. It's not practical.
Yeah.
There's two questions. This kind of conceptual conversation. Is there an official statute of limitations on spoilers?
I think you've got like something like this a week, certainly a month.
Like we can talk about like Rogue One and stuff, right? Like that's past, but there seems to be a certain time frame.
So the thing on Game of Thrones that I didn't fully appreciate until now, which may help this a little bit, is there's a group of people who are not watching the show at all, and are just reading the books, and they've been reading the books since the 90s.
Okay.
And so when you say X, Y, and Z happen in the show, it's less that I haven't seen the show yet, and more.
I want the pure book experience.
But I mean that's like impossible.
But this is all non-canon, right?
I mean, define canon.
Well, it's not Gur Martin.
Did we decide, is the show doing the things that Gur is saying are going to happen in the books?
I think he said, here's how I'm going to end it, and here's everything you know so far.
Mountaintop kind of.
And now they're drawing a path.
Okay.
And there's just a lot, even in the I don't want to say that. That's a spoiler.
I will say that it feels very much like a Dollhouse, or it's like that kind of a thing where you realize you have 1 or 2 seasons left. In Dollhouse's case, like the end of this season, to get to where you need to go. And so maybe that's where a lot of the awkwardness comes in, is you just need to draw the lines and hope that it works out.
And I'm of course not privy or into all the nitty-gritty details of the production, but how much of it is necessarily driven by the commitment of their principal actors. They're only looking to do 7 years of this thing, and then they want to get on with their lives. But outside of things like that, I would imagine they could have strung this along for as many seasons as they please.
For a while.
It's a money machine.
Well, and I think it's actually pretty topical. There'll be a nice segue at some point in a minute. But the reality of, I maybe even why right now George R. R. Martin, the author of the books, is struggling to finish the books that he's finishing is the same reason, which is, I know I have the end point in mind, and I've said it's going to be in 2 more books. I have a feeling that to do it at the pace he was doing it before, and it not to be jarring like the show has felt, like the show feels jarring, like it's not what you're expecting. And so it could be that he's running the same issue, and it may end up taking 4 or 5 more books, which that's not even possible. Really, like it's
he just needs to watch that Lady and the Beast show that was such a hit.
One of them, certainly one of them.
I think that is definitely. I don't know.
It was like there's like a lion man living in the sewer.
Oh man,
It was from the 80s.
You're not talking about Beauty and the Beast, right?
This is like a Gur Martin
really?
show from the 80s
I had no
that
idea.
he wrote. And gosh, I wish I could remember. But anyway, no,
That seems a quick Google search away.
Oh
It's
my
very-
gosh, yeah, Jonathan's doing it.
But yeah, he is searching. But with the show, it very much feels like
it's been forever since I saw
they
it. Yeah, there we go.
They slowly set it up. It looks like Beauty and the Beast is what it's called.
Is that what it was called?
TV's Beauty and the
TV's
Beast.
Beauty and the Beast.
All right, there
But
you go. Look it
anyways,
up, everybody.
It feels like they got through it really even the season before with the like Martell plot that just kind of like fizzled really quickly. And in the books, it's not. It's a very critical part of what's happening. So it feels like it was like, well, we have 2 seasons left. We know where we have to get, and now everything is just happening.
Yeah.
Like at breakneck speed, and I just hope that the last season is masterpiece level. Like I know it could be.
Yeah, I hope so, because that's what's going to determine if I buy all the DVD sets.
Yeah.
I somehow doubt that. What about you, Steven? What have you been up to?
Oh, I've been sick, really. I mean, I just...
Getting con cred.
Yeah, I after the podcast last week, actually, the next day or 2 days, where the rest of the... I think I was sick. I was home.
Just Thursday, yeah.
And then this weekend was the same thing. I was recovering, and then my wife got sick this weekend as well, and so now she's on her way out of it, and here we are. So, but I have played a decent bit of L5R at this point, so that's nice. I've started to actually get a feel for the real game and what it looks like to build a deck and have an actual plan going into a game, which is a fascinating thing. It's a very different kind of experience than just playing a core set deck, as you might expect in any game of any, especially like an FFG core set that is trying to introduce as many concepts as possible, like show you the kind of color pie of a faction without doing any of it well. So it's like, hey, a lion can do all this stuff, but you have 1 card in your deck for each of those things. So that's just not quite as effective. So that's been really great. And yeah, just recovered. And, there's something really nice. Something really nice about being sick in that it gives you an excuse to really just like not do anything, Why
don't you do more of nothing?
Well, that's the thing. That's the problem is I
think
have a very mechanical kind of like task-driven brain. So I feel lazy or like I'm wasting my life if I'm not most of the time participating in some kind of an activity that might be for my own betterment or maintenance. So I just need to build the maintenance box bigger for like staring at walls.
Yeah, you're going to end up like that guy on Naked and Afraid who just could not quit doing things and he psyched himself right out of the show.
And I think I would have the presence of mind. If survival was actually one of the top concerns, then and relaxing and being lazy was a way to survive, I could definitely justify it at that point. But I don't need to be lazy to survive right now.
But there's
but
really...
I can be.
But I can't be. You just got to play the lotto.
I definitely... that's one way of doing it. I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I think building in the breaks as a task that you need to do to recover.
But
because if not, you randomly get sick. And
the breaks, well, maybe. Is the breaks... The breaks, though... The breaks need to be productive too, right? You're breaking for a reason. You're trying to achieve an end, which is relaxation, not for its own sake, but so that I don't get sick, or so that I'm not tired, or so that I can recharge and be
and so better. That when you are actually working, you're as productive as
just spoken like a true CEO.
Yeah, and there is a whole spectrum, kind of like you're implying. I mean, you got everything from Krishnamurti to Oprah.
Yoda, yes,
Oprah. Yoda. I wish. Look under your chairs, everybody. It's a lightsaber. But no, Krishnamurti is productive repose kind of a guy, and then Oprah is the advocate of you need to take 5 to 10 minutes and literally do nothing kind of a thing, just so you can decompress.
Mr. Murty's bringing that just the philosophy that I love so much for this reason, because it throws a stick in the cog of my my way of running my life, which is like you're trying to achieve something, but what is the ultimate end to that, right? Like where ultimately is this leading? It's you kind of get into that rat race mentality where you're doing things to do more things, but like where is that end and what is the ultimate value in all of that? So it's good to keep that stuff in perspective. But I also wish that a lot of my leisure time I would choose to use in actually productively restful ways instead of just like staring at a Netflix show, like actually like meditating or reading, these kinds of things that I also think are incredibly valuable, that am kind of not doing. So maybe even just reshuffling the quiet time is useful. And I keep saying that, but God, it's just so tempting.
Food Truck Wars is not a waste of time.
It's so easy to watch an episode. I've been watching a lot of Catfish too, and like that is just like bottom of the barrel.
It is very much
greatness.
not productive. I can assure you of that.
But you guys are both smiling big enough that I feel like it is restful.
I'm smiling just because the show is absurd.
Brain.
It's like these are people doing some of the worst kinds of fraud and deception, interpersonal kind. And it's heinous.
Are you familiar with catfishing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
didn't even know it was a term until I saw the show.
It's a real term, and it was a movie, and you've made a movie, and that's where it all started.
Keanu Reeves?
An acclaimed movie, and then it became a TV show. But yeah, it's weird. You're meeting all sorts of weird people that decided to tell you they were somebody else for 5 years. Like, and in a lot of ways, if you haven't talked to somebody like on the phone or seen their face in 5 years, and you think you're going to marry them. You own a lot of that.
Or worse yet, broke off.
Part of that's on you.
Broke off a relationship where you were going to be married in order to pursue this catfish.
That is unbelievable.
Whiskers and all.
I could see that'd be addicting.
Next week's episode will be on catfishing.
Yeah, we obviously have a lot to say.
For me, the only thing I really did was freaked out about the Rainbow Destiny deck. I'm going to Nova this week.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm trying to get ready for that for Destiny, and we'll see.
Tell us about the Rainbow Destiny deck.
What'd you say?
Where's Nova again?
It's outside of Washington, D.C.
Bethesda?
No.
Or Alexandria?
It's close to Alexandria, which I'm a fan of. Right. We won't dive into that. But Rainbow deck is a villain deck that has all 3 colors in it. That's why it's called Rainbow. 3 out of the 3 colors, not 5. But
there are 7 colors in a rainbow.
Which is more than most decks have.
3, yes. It's at least 1 more than most decks have, for sure. Anyways, it's this really obnoxious deck, and there's the FN21999s.
He's always been a problem and always be a problem.
Does he bring his baton?
Hold on, do you want to know why?
Is it because he breaks the action sequence?
Zach, I'm glad that you mentioned
action cheating again?
Still
dealing with it?
Yet again, this thing where I can do a basic action in the game, rolling a die and resolving it, all without any kind of reaction. It's like, well, obviously, who is surprised by this?
No one.
No
right?
one.
Just look for those cards, and one of them is going to be the right choice.
It's a particularly nasty combination of characters and cards, and like once you've seen it, like you look at it without playing against it, it's like, okay, that's pretty good, and then you play against it, and it does some obnoxious things. But there's definitely, I think there are answers built in to the game. There are answers that are built into the game that make you way better against those things, but you're getting suboptimal against everything else.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's that classic situation where...
Guess the meta?
Where do you...
Pull a deck out of a hat?
Yeah. Where do you land? Like, how much do you optimize for one particular match versus the rest of the field? Because
honestly, I think if that goes too far, it actually is not productive at all. People... I mean, there's an element of it that's like, isn't this so diverse and awesome that there are 5 decks, and like if you tech for one, you lose to the other 3 or 4. I'm not sure that that's actually productive.
And I think there's always the consideration of the meta, but I won't soon forget the Game of Thrones world champion Alvaro from like 2015, 2014, who I thought gave a very good interview in which, to sum up, he essentially said, there is a meta, sure, but take a look at it, but then build a strong deck using strong cards, and that's the long and short of it. And that's what I did, and that's how I won.
And I think that's when it gets out of whack is when you can't build fundamentally good decks anymore, because if this deck, and I've never been a fan of the action breaking in Destiny in any form, honestly, like whether it's Ray or Django or Nines or Maz or mainly those cards.
These all sound like the decks that have been strong over the years.
Yeah, well, they are, because they are. But it's definitely, we'll see.
You think it's the most problematic thing that you've seen in the game? Like, are you worried about it? Are you scared of it? Are you not? Can you beat it, and are you going to run it? I'm not going to run it. If you can't beat them, you join them. That's the ultimate conclusion. Yeah. But it is beatable. My problem with it is that you're going to sacrifice heavily against everything else to be able to beat it, which is a bad position to be in. Like, I mean, it's not just like, okay, my win percentage goes down 10% against the other stuff. It's like I cannot.
or it's bad. It's
20% bad.
You have to really really. So I don't know. I Nines is probably over the line. I won't be surprised if Nines gets changed. He's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
Forever and ever. So we'll see. I'll talk about that next week on the show.
And an aside, Empire at War, nothing spoiled so far that has anything to do with action cheating at all. I think.
They probably yoinked them all.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe Journey went in there.
That's you may have missed something.
Whoa, well, what's going on?
It's action cheating in the way that I'm a fan of.
Okay, like force speed? I'm cool with force speed.
Force speed's
When
fine.
you're doing it?
Yeah. Like when I'm chaining Ray out, not you. No, the Kanan, they spoiled. He's a 10-13 blue hero character, force user. And basically, anytime you would take an action, before you take that action, you can resolve one of his character dice.
Okay.
So you have to roll him into the pool, and then it's like...
That's still fine, though. Yeah.
This is fine. That kind of thing.
It's a lowercase cheat.
Yeah, it's not... And it's very specific, right? It's his die, and whatever you rolled on his die, and his die has to be in the pool before you take the action.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a fan of that. All right, let's dive in, shall we?
Please.
Why do games fail? I'm going to let you guys take it away. I'll be back. Just kidding. I think, for me, part of this conversation is... before we dive into why they fail, talking about what it means for a game to be successful, because failure is inherently a game not doing that.
This is obviously something we need to define because we've been dancing around this for a long time with the LCG sustainable and like how to, save a dying game and these kinds of things. So actually drawing that out is important. I think successful. So let me throw the most simple definition at this, which is a game is successful when you have other people to play it with on a consistent basis. Is that fair to say? This is from the player's perspective.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for, a lot of times my natural thinking goes to like the expandable games that keep having stuff come out. But, if you think about something as simple as Monopoly, which is a game your parents bought you when you were 8, and it's like, what does it mean for Monopoly to be successful? And I think there's a lot of metrics that you could use. You could use popularity, you could use sales, you could use, in terms of expandable games, how big is the community, how many players can I find? But even then, it's like technically right now, I occasionally do this, which is I still have usually 2 or 3 decks / lists for the games I played in the past. So every couple of years I play the Star Wars CCG, every couple of years I play the Star Wars TCG. So there's a part of it for me with games where success isn't completely bound to the like financial or popularity success of a particular game, in that I think the first objective as a game is to provide something for people to enjoy together.
Right.
And so there's different layers of this for me.
But it has to be together.
Sure.
I can't think of a successful game that isn't the kind of game that you can play with, like find somebody to play it with. Like I wouldn't say that, give an example, like Doomtown is a weird one because it actually kind of like died and then came back. Let's use Spoils, because Spoils actually died like 3 or 4 times, I think, throughout its history. But it's like definitely dead right now. So I've got my Spoils decks. I'm interested in a game. Where do I go and what do I do? So at that point, to me, the game has failed. Like I can't play it, and therefore it is dead. DEAD.
So by your definition, you would consider a game to be successful even if there is no more content being produced or released, purchasable, etc. But you still have people who are retaining their goods and playing with it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Like the Star Wars CCG community is a good example. Like that's been going on for years and years and years, and still meet up. Because I can still be interested in that game, play it. Dive in, get all of the elements of game that I want, which might be like thinking about decks, thinking about deck building, meeting up with the community every so often. So it's checking all the boxes for why we engage in this hobby to begin with, right? So as long as it's doing that, I think of that, it's still successful until that is no longer the case.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, the number one sign of a game being successful is if it is bringing people together for an experience, right? Because like I played at Worlds with Ron from Chicago, Star Wars TCG.
Yeah, I remember
we
that.
both our decks back in May, I guess, and we played a couple games while we were just waiting on something to happen. And that is the number one thing for me, because that ultimately was not a commercial success. This TCG in particular, it came out, they sold it. It may or may not have been profitable, but then they stopped producing it. Game goes away, but continue to be played, which I don't think has to be the case. Right now, someone could have 2 decks and they could just play at home with their friend or whatever. But in terms of a lot of the games we tend to talk about, these games that are expanding, right? Star Wars TCG was one of those games and it went away. Spoils was one of these games and it stopped producing content. And so I think when I'm talking about failure, so then I guess then if success of a game is bringing people together to play a game, what then does what really is failure when we're talking about it?
It's when that's not happening anymore, or can't happen.
Yeah.
More specifically, I mean, I think very, very clearly what we're talking about here is expandable games that stop expanding.
Yeah,
pretty much, because like that, what we're saying is that there is a promise being made at the beginning of this game that says we're going to continue to produce content for it, and then that stops at some point.
Or any game. I don't even think you would need it to be expandable. You could release that one box and it just didn't sell. Nobody bought it.
It certainly could be unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Just a complete failure. A number of board games, I'm sure, are just entirely
Yeah.
failures. And that's mainly about, sales and, whether or not people are playing it. Is it on the shelves or not? Are retailers stocking it? There's that level of it. It probably would be helpful for us to contain the conversation in terms of why do games fail
Commercially.
Well, by no longer producing content, right? I don't think we're going to have a conversation about a board game that released, wasn't good, and failed. Like, that's pretty straightforward.
or even a game that released, sold out, people still play it to this day, but like,
That was a success.
Yeah, that's a success.
yeah,
That's great.
totally.
I got no problem with that.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about games like Conquest, it failed. Straight up. And that was a licensing thing, but it was also
before the licensing
a
thing.
development thing.
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of issues. I think Star Wars LCG is on the edge, right? It had a ton of release problems.
Well.
It has a ton of, the popularity of the game has, tanked.
I mean,
around here at least.
I would unquestionably say that it has failed.
Yeah, at this point. I mean,
As one of the biggest fans of the game and people that was super into it, it's not. The game did not fail at connecting people and bringing people together, and I have made a lot of great friends. I'm actually, when I'm going to Nova this weekend, I'm staying with Tom, who I met through the Star
Tom
Wars.
Malici.
Yeah, from the Star Wars LCG. So like, there was a lot of good that came from that game, and there was success in it in that way. But ultimately, for one reason or another, it failed. It failed. It's at some point in the future, there's going to not be product coming out for it.
but it's still being played.
It's still being played, but it's.
But I think we, like kind of you said, we kind of need to narrow the realm of it, because even if a game isn't releasing product anymore and people are still playing it, that doesn't really give us a tight criterion in order to differentiate, something like that game or something like Conquest, or because of reasons, or even Star Wars LCG, which is still very much releasing product occasionally.
I think under our definition, as we've defined so far, I would say it hasn't officially failed, but it's definitely at the doorstep.
Failing.
Yeah, it's in the process of failing.
Yeah.
Which is, I expect it to end at some point in the future.
And at that point, can it recover?
But yeah, even ending a game, is that necessarily an issue? One reason or another, because it's if what's a show where they only make so many episodes, it's completely scripted, Sherlock or something like that. They only are into it to make so many seasons, episodes per season. That's pretty much all mapped out from the beginning. And when it ends, it's like, well, it's not a perpetual concern. So we're happy to walk away from it when our work's done.
And I think we've talked about this before as well, which is this idea that like most games, especially the expandable ones, don't go on forever. There's only a couple that have continued to go on for as long as they've existed. And that's kind of a rare class. So I also really what I'm there's two types of failure to me. There's the like failure to launch, really. It's like the out of the gate. This game came out within the first year or two, was just like never really had any success. But then there's also the like game really dying. It's like, why do games die?
Like a slow roll off.
Yeah, it's like
we've seen that. Yeah. So I think Alpha VAR is a cool example of this too, because the traditional collectible card game goes for 20 years, but ultimately it gets to a point where it is failing as well. It is untenable for AEG to continue to produce it. Populations going down, sales going down, that kind of a thing. So here's what I want to pinpoint is, why does that moment start? When and why does that downward spiral start? Because once it starts, I don't know that there's been a lot of cases where the tailspin has been pulled out of and recovered from. There may be a few throughout the history of things, but this is why I think tabletop gaming fans, especially collectible people, are so always aware and asking how many people are playing, who's playing where, is this game starting to lose interest, is my collection becoming less valuable, et cetera, because you know that once that kind of thing starts spiraling, it's very much like kind of a foregone conclusion that it will end, thereafter. And so LCGs don't have as much of a kind of immediate death, if you will. A collectible game has to choose, are we going to pull the lever for X thousands of units of the next set or not? So that's a lot more, I guess, stressful.
Yeah.
But in LCG, you have a slower, kind of paced out release. So you can go from, let's say, 10,000 players to 9,500 to 9,000, and it continues to kind of be worth it until you hit a certain threshold of players where it's no longer worth it. But why does that start happening? Why does the tanking begin to occur?
Well, and I think there's a lot of reasons why. And it's different for a lot. There's a lot of cases. We could talk about specifics, right? Like at Star Wars LCG, maybe did everything possible to do.
All the failure.
Maybe not everything. They didn't do everything. There's a lot of ways that it could have gone worse. Like the game could have been awful, or the art could be bad, or whatever. But ultimately, like as an example, I think one of the key tenets of a game getting to that point is in the timing of releases, which is with the Star Wars LCG, they actually had 2 6-month periods in the first 18 months where there was no products coming out. And so that immediately, just step one is like with an LCG or a game that is intended to expand, part of that experience is the fact that you buy your starters, your core sets or whatever, and then you play that, and the depth is only a certain
only so far you can go.
Only so far you can go. And then you get some packs, and it goes a little deeper. And then you get more packs, and it goes deeper. And then you get a box, and then and it just kind of set on. And the first, unfortunately, of those 18 months, there were 6 packs released. And the 6 packs that were released, this is mistake number 2, which is development. And the packs were themed very tightly together. It was a Hoth cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So snow speeders and AT-ATs and snow troopers and all this stuff. But the theme was tied so tightly to mechanics that none of the cards really worked with the core set cards.
Yeah.
And then you got 1 pack. And so you get a pack of new cards for the first time and you're excited, and none of them are really playable. Then you get the second pack, and you can almost start building Hoth decks, but not quite, and they don't really work. And then third and fourth, and eventually you get the sixth, and it's like, well, now you can kind of build 1 Hoth deck that's kind of as good as the core set deck you've been playing with for 18 months. So that was kind of a mixture of both the release schedule not being held to, and we've seen this in many games. Conquest had a similar issue. Ashes
just went through that in a huge way.
Big way. And development is a huge topic.
Mm-hmm.
Development for that, and that particular reason, it was you developed a product that wasn't immediately exciting and enticing. And I think those first year of products are very critical.
So let me propose as we're kind of thinking through this, let me propose a series of bars that have to be crossed, or boxes that have to be checked in order. So the first obligation and the first thing to make a game successful is you have to, as the manufacturer, have a steady stream of content as promised. Right? So if that means a release every 3 months, you need to release something every 3 months. If it's every month, you need to release every month. You need to hold to the promises that you set out when people bought into this game. The agreement that we had together. So that's the first place it can go wrong. If the manufacturer is not producing product as intended, then check number 1, probably out the door, right?
It's a problem, yeah.
So then box number 2 is, okay, if we have a constant stream of product, what's the quality of those products? Are they being developed in a way that is conducive to exciting, interesting play that's worth expanding upon, that that actually makes the expanded experience better than a standalone experience. And that's not always the case. Sometimes as games expand, they actually get worse than they were before they were expanding. And that's something that should never happen if development is on point. So then you have development. So if development is great and products are coming out on time, we're getting somewhere. Like, this is a game that could perpetually go. So then the third one is organized play, community support, outreach, these kinds of things. And if you have all three of those, then I think you're getting to a game that has no reason to die, as it were, to just kind of spiral out.
I think there's also a either different step 1 or step 0, which is obviously the game itself up front probably needs to be designed well.
Oh yeah.
The core game, and then not only that, but the launch of that, which is effectively, you have to have some fire to make a bigger fire kind of situation.
Critical mass of players. Yeah.
The opening to a game is very important to the long-term success.
So open it well, pitch it well, design it well. Of course, it has to be a great...
That's just like an assumed thing, right?
Yeah,
of course, it
well
has to be a good game.
Otherwise, it'll tank right out the gate. And so those are kind of the checkboxes for me that go through. And we've had a number of games that kind of will miss a box at various steps. And then there are some games that hit all of those boxes, like Magic the Gathering. Warhammer's been through a lot of 40Ks, been a lot of back and forth. Actually, War Machine Hordes, like that system has stuck around for a long time. That's continuing to check most of those boxes. There are some games that are continuing to go and go and go, and presumably any of these expandable games could. But is the product being manufactured? Is the development on point? And is the community support there? And then you have to kind of look at those three things and say, well, who's responsible for what? Right? So who's responsible? Obviously, the manufacturer is responsible for manufacturing the product. That's pretty easy, right? That's the number one putt that you have to make.
And they're the only person in the chain that can do that.
Yeah, but then when it comes to development, again, it seems pretty clear that the producer of the game and the artists, creative types that are, doing that kind of work need proper play testing, need, channels of feedback so that they can actually create something that is worthwhile. Another piece of development, though, to me, is actually manicuring and paying attention to the way that the game is being played and is being understood. So development also, we've seen, at least in FFG's case, the developers and designers are the ones that are working on what kind of a restricted list do we need, or a ban list, or an errata list. So there's an element of that is making sure the game is developing in a healthy way. And that includes the cards you're releasing and the way that you're curating the tournament scene and just the way that people are playing your game. And then the third one is community support. And I think that this is the most interesting plank of the three in terms of not really having a clear picture of who's responsible for which pieces at this level. At various times the players have been responsible, the stores have been responsible, the game creators have been responsible. And so maybe solving that piece of the puzzle is where I think a lot of these games begin to tank. Is you have a bunch of hype up front, you have a great game, it starts, it releases, things come out, packs are great, everybody's excited, cards are developed, there's new stuff, new concepts, but then there's more games released and new things over here, and this community is, there's only so many resources to go around, so now a lot of attention is on this other game or this new game coming out. Well, now I don't have as much resources invested in the outreach for this game, and et cetera, et cetera. So you see this kind of almost a leapfrogging of people from one game to the next because you kind of have to go where the energy is, right? So is there a way to create energy perpetually, like within the games, any individual game itself?
And
we're looking for the fusion reactor here of communities.
That brings up a few important questions or points that are running through my mind as you're talking about that, which is, we have talked about in the RLCD sustainable topic, we talked about like a product life cycle of these games. And, part of it is the fact that he's talking about the leapfrogging, is that a lot of games, right? The expandable games in particular are, to me, about depth, right? It's the reality of the difference between buying a new board game and buying the next set of the game you already know how to play is that you get to experience the same game in new and different and further ways that you didn't before. And so at some point, though, there are games that you've had enough experiences with, right? Like I think it's very natural where there has to be a lot of boxes getting checked for it to be the game that you want to play for the next 20 years or that you want to come back to 10 years later kind of a situation. That's a very, there's a magic, no pun intended, to that, which is it has to be a really special game, I think, to have that kind of energy because, at some point you've played the spoils enough that it's like, well, I'm more interested in exploring a new thing than I am in further exploring this thing, even because that's where, to me, like all the boxes could be getting checked and the game could still fail. You could be releasing on time. You could be supporting the game heavily on a local marketing, all these kind of ways. You could be developing it correctly and still yet, because in time, I think there's always going to be, we've been talking a lot about the internal pieces of a game and why it fails or succeeds. But there's the external situation too, which is the new game just came out. And I've been playing Conquest for 3 years or whatever game, Spoils or Destiny or any of the games, X-Wing, and it's like, well, Legion's coming out. And so I've kind of been playing X-Wing for 6 years. So, and I'm still going to play X-Wing. But that's a real, the outside forces of movement. Competition are real. And so I think that's what development is really important in making sure that you're developing it in such a way that they are actually finding new experiences that are engaging them over and over again, both in terms of the story and the content and the way of play. And that's very, you can only do that. It's hard to do forever. It really is hard to do.
But then also, a lot of this has been kind of framed in the context of the individual. Like, what's my perception of what this game is and what it's trying to do in terms of being a success or not. But then you also have to think that the vast majority of players have not been playing it from its inception. I think one of the linchpins of a game being successful, or vice versa, is how well can they do all those things that keep a pre-existing player base looped in, but then also recognizing that you will have attrition. You're not going to maintain 100% in a roster, and you're only just going to add to it, and you're never losing a single name off of it, kind of a thing. But
that's not how that works.
You have to always have an appeal, just as much as the current players, but to the new players. And I think that is really one of the biggest linchpins in terms of certainly on a commercial level, if you can continue producing game and having a return on it. But outside of that, you're only going to have one focus audience, particularly, and that's one of the pitfalls of an LCG, is outside of rotation, which hasn't happened yet. You're looking to get into an LCG. If it's been out for longer than 6 months, rather, you're looking at a huge investment in both money and then time to figure out where I can source all this stuff from, and
learning all this stuff,
the rules, figuring out what the meta is. It's a big onus on a new player. So they kind of predispose themselves at maybe having a higher retention rate for something like an LCG, but a much lower adoption rate once the game is finally established.
And I think that's so true. The LCG attrition rate is much lower than a lot of games because it is such a slow drip system of getting new content. But that is, I think, another tenet of a game ultimately continuing to be successful is, what are you doing to continue to attract new people to this experience? Whether that's through, there's a million ways that can be done. And I think that's something that hasn't been done a lot. It's the part of the process that I think people are paying the least amount of attention to, which is what new exciting thing is getting people into X-Wing today or into Netrunner today. And I don't think anyone's really talking about that or trying to do that.
No, I mean, I think the biggest problem with FFG's approach right now to all of their lines, and this is a problem with the approach of miniatures games the world over, whether it's Infinity or War Machine or Warhammer, it's basically launch, SKU, make more products.
Rules reset.
It goes forever.
Yeah.
And then it just there's no, when do you stop that and give an entry point? Yeah. Because right now, when we got into Infinity, I mean, the amount of models that were out was overwhelming.
Is it the 2-pack squad or the 3-pack squad?
3-pack squad, and this one has this weapon and this one has that one. What does that mean?
Countless games, yeah.
What does that look like? And we've been doing this for such a long time that it's that's kind of we're used to that and we can dive in, but heaven forbid I try to pitch anybody,
Sure.
on this kind of experience. It would be terribly difficult.
We have seen, though, if you look at something like 40K, which is on its 8th edition, and I think this is probably the best example of a game that, it's having valleys and peaks, and it's, slowly losing and attritioning players, and then they put out a new edition, new leadership at the company, and all of a sudden there's a lot of energy and excitement, and this is the time to jump in. They're giving very clear, this is the moment you want, if you've been thinking about getting in, this is the time to get in.
Yeah.
Situations.
And I find it ironic in the true sense, maybe, if we could ever define it.
Alanis will judge.
Yeah, we'll see. That getting too far away from, we're talking about giving exciting new experiences to pre-existing players. At the same time, getting too far away from your core mechanics totally ruins the thing too.
But then again, I definitely recall how vital that crazy first edition Thrones community got when the Long Voyage card came out.
Yeah.
But it was both adopted by some, yours truly, passionately, and ridiculed by a good number of others for that same reason. So even in that, it's a huge amount of risk because you could split the house kind of a thing, or you could, hopefully, and I think that's part of the intent of putting out cards like that upset a game fundamental like that, which is card draw if you don't know, is to revitalize it and get that newness back for your pre-existing players.
Well, and I think it's less to me about totally changing as much as making sure that you have built in these natural points at which it will be easiest to get in and excited about, where both people that have drifted away from the game for one reason or another, or people that have always been interested but are too far behind kind of a situation. I think Netrunner is a really good example of that now, which is I'm pretty convinced there's not very many of the current Netrunner players that would be upset with a pretty big sweeping burning down the house, keeping the structure, rebuilding. And that's a great re-entry point for everyone that's kind of drifted away, and a great re-entry point for anyone that hasn't ever really jumped into Netrunner. And, thinking about it, it's like, do games naturally just need to have resets?
Because it's just the Valor Morghulis problem. Right? Because the thing is that the Netrunner players, like myself, I would be totally in. But there's one thing that I would want with this, a relaunch or anything like that that's going to happen. How are you going to fix this moving forward?
Yeah.
I have to know that before I'm willing to dive back in and watch a community slowly roll away, right? Like I think at this point we've seen LCGs come in and do this, and now we're at a point where we can look back on it and we can say, okay, what has worked, what hasn't? Show me the next step for the LCG model. I think that's critically important. And with miniatures games, it's kind of the same thing for me. It's like, how are you going to do something aside from continuously releasing models until the end of time? Are you going to reprint things? Are you going to do new editions? Are you going to take models off the table? It's very hard for miniatures players because these are things you constructed and painted and care about. So saying that I can't use this in the game anymore is a much bigger deal.
Well, I think depends on the miniature game we're talking about. But when I'm thinking about the two primary ones that come to mind are like an X-Wing versus like a Legion. And I'm not sure with a like 40K style war game with a bunch of SKUs, I don't think the target there is necessarily talking about development and balance and how many SKUs you have to buy to get in, where it's like, I think you can have 1 million SKUs for a miniature game and be fine.
If they're well balanced.
But even more importantly, if you just always constantly have a great way for people to get in.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it doesn't matter if you have the core set Legion Darth Vader or the Warhammer 40K model from 3 years ago. Because when you want to get started, here's the thing that you get, right?
Yeah.
Like, here are the different factions, choose your favorite model, choose your favorite single item to buy, and it's like an army, right? And then again, having the natural, like, big exciting moments that are the entry points where you have these change ups but then there's the version of like X-Wing where like it's as simple as telling me which ships are legal right now. It's like maybe the advanced tie from the core set isn't legal right now and I have bought that, so that's a bummer, but like I know that next season it probably is going to be legal and I get to use it. But just a way to keep it fresh without just having to put more things out. I think the reliance on putting things out to keep it fresh is hard because then you run out of space to make new stuff. And you also start creating problems within your own development of cards or miniatures that work off of each other.
So after all of this, what if we just said, in terms of what is game failure, it's quite simply when you're losing more players than you're gaining.
Mm-hmm.
That is really the switch, right?
That's the moment it starts happening.
And so we're talking about how do you prevent that?
And I remember anecdote time. I think that's the right word.
Yeah.
I remember with Netrunner in particular, just very particular. And it was in December 2015. We hosted the HAC. It was a community run.
Yeah.
Big event, right?
Very cool thing. Yeah.
They had like qualifiers where you had to win to qualify for this tournament, and then all the qualifiers came here to play in the big thing, and it was just this really crazy thing. But at that time, I remember having the feeling that the switch was beginning, and there, just locally and regionally, and the way people were talking online, it was like there's a lot of people really committed to this, but the fresh blood has stopped flowing in.
Yeah.
And like that's concerning.
Yeah.
And then
it's sounding very much like a lot of the things that we're talking about are about preventing attrition. So, producing products prevents attrition, developing the game over time in a good way prevents people from leaving. But I think, what we're dealing with is there's always going to be a natural rate of attrition.
Yeah.
So why do games fail? Obviously, that ratio gets out of balance. You have more players leaving than are entering. And then the question then becomes, I think the grand thing to solve is, well, then how do you get more people entering the game than are leaving? So two ways, obviously. You limit attrition as much as possible, and you increase new players as much as possible. So we talked about how to limit attrition in a very macro way. How do you get new players in a macro way? First is the products. You have to have an entry point. It has to be, available. Once somebody wants to get in, it has to be there for them. But how do you get somebody interested in starting a game like Netrunner right now?
Well, Jeff.
Well, I would say it's a multifaceted kind of approach, and it's not necessarily this nor that, but it's this and that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. For me, it's Magic because I was there obliquely when it was first getting started in like middle school or something like that, and faded out, and then got really hot and heavy with it in high school and college. But then the reason for that even being a possibility that many years later was that there were, of course, people still playing the game, but you can't just jump right in because, again, all these other reasons, the meta, the buy-in, etc. But the linchpin for Magic was the deck and play and tournament types. So, you could be playing whatever and I can't remember all the technical names for all the different formats, but you have your legacy format for all the old schoolers who don't care about the rules to keep a meta neat and tight, or you have your type 1 or whatever it is, your standard format.
Modern?
I can't remember.
Standard and modern.
But yeah, there's all these, and there
and you also have draft and sealed.
Exactly. So Magic ultimately is an incredibly versatile game that allows both new players and old players to get in on the thing where they can contend and not be either too good or too inferior against the competition, and that's the inherently rewarding experience that you're looking for.
And I think Magic does the very consistent releases. Mm-hmm. Constantly shifting which is affecting legacy and modern and sealed and draft.
Yep.
And every time a new set comes out, right, it's like promotion, marketing, getting people in. Even if you at some point in the future they may release a set that looks really cool,
even iconic art, yeah.
And like you could just go play a draft,
yeah,
right. You can always come back to that,
mm-hmm.
and that may be one of the big secrets to their success is that I feel like they do always have an entry point.
Mm-hmm.
Like
mm-hmm.
at all times, there's a way to get back in, which is...
So how do you do that if you're not... I mean, is that really just the answer? You need a format to play, it sounds like.
They've tried, but they're essentially, not wholly compatible, and I'm not sure on the rules, but, Game of Thrones, Netrunner, who else has put out draft materials at this point?
I think that's all they did. But obviously the value there is hard because
exactly.
Magic draft,
but
you want the cards.
That's the thing, is that they're not necessarily compatible. So it's sort of like you're getting, the halfway of a manifestation of that thing you're really looking for, which is to play in this format, still have the materials that you can then transfer into the other, that kind of a thing. But with the Netrunner drafts, it's like, I don't even know if you could bring those cards to a tournament
You
because
can.
of
You can,
you
but
can
and they
or
look different.
They parse
and
it but they do look different, and that matters to some. It would matter to
it
me.
definitely matters to me.
Yeah,
100% matters
it's
to
like
me.
I would like them.
Now,
be
to be
standard.
fair, on the marketability of those, if those had been like the World Champ decks where they're full
the
full
full
bleed,
art and whatnot.
it's the
At
value's
that point, why is
different.
the whole game not full?
I
Yeah,
bet
well,
you
that's
could
the real question.
have any kind of game just with full art cards.
Yeah,
But,
right.
But that's I think there's a lot of ways to slice it, but ultimately I think what we're honing in on is the reality of you have to have a way, some exciting way for people to get in there and interested. But the other part of this for me that's really is that sometimes you just can't flip that switch. Like you can't force people to be excited about a thing or a theme or
And like North Korea.
well, maybe you can.
Got him.
But I mean, I think I've seen that a lot where it's like, and I get it. People are really attached to a game. They love it. They want to see it keep going. They want to see it be successful. But it's like it doesn't matter how hard you trying to get people into the Spoils TCG right now is just impossible. Mm-hmm. Like the amount of effort, and there's definitely the like player effort, right, which is noteworthy and admirable. But then the reality of like when you're talking about retailers or the people that are typically hosting and building these communities, the effort it takes to get someone into Spoils versus the ultimate like what that means for your business, getting someone into Spoils or your community even, is so high effort, low return versus the new exciting thing that's coming out.
That's just a short putt, right?
Are talking about and want to be involved in. But even as a store, it's like having opportunities to get people re-excited about these older games, Netrunner, X-Wing, who are now going on 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, would be awesome. And that's a lot of work to be done there.
One of the biggest problems for me is that if you don't have an influx of new players or new people of any kind coming into the store or the tabletop space in general, then you've already lost, right? Like you can't get player of game A to start playing player or game B and expect game A to continue to do well.
Yeah.
And so you sacrifice game A for game B and you sacrifice game B for game C. And that's kind of how the industry has gone, is the same player will move through X amount of games over their lifespan instead of this person finds this game, sticks with it. And all of these new people that are coming into your store for the first time, they're going to game B, C, D, E, F. And so there's an element of outreach that I think that the local community is simply not engaging in. It was set up, and we talked about this a while back, it was set up, early on as a retail space. It's the only place you could go to get gaming products, right? And that was really handy. That was before the internet and all this stuff was happening. And it's like if you wanted to buy the latest pack or whatever, it was the only place you could go. So naturally, they just opened their doors, and the people who wanted to play these games generally were just coming in to get the products because they needed them. Communities started forming, and tabletop, as we know it, it's fantastic. Now that you can get your products anywhere and you can do all of that, the role of the tabletop gaming store is no longer, people are trying to hold on to this, but it's not just because it's where you get your products, right? Product availability is worldwide 24/7, wherever you want it. Now it has to be about outreach. It has to be about taking this hobby and sharing it with people who are not currently involved. If you're doing that, that's the only way that you can really start to prop up and continue to promote all of these games, is you have to have new blood in.
And I think the math on attrition versus gain in a particular game is the same for a local community / store.
Yeah.
Which is, if you're not gaining people, eventually that's the same problem.
Yeah.
Like for the store that it is for the particular game itself.
Because for every game that's getting built up, you're attritioning harder everything else. Because they're coming from somewhere, right? They're coming from a pre-existing game that is now worse off. So you have to have new players. And it sounds like really the main thing is you have to have new people coming into the space, and you have to get those people funneled into the clearest and most exciting and cleanest entry into the game they're excited about possible. So you have to have somewhere for them to go. If a new player comes in and says, I'm interested in Netrunner, what happens next right now? Like, grab a core set, and we're going to not exactly tell you the reality of the fact that there are X number of deluxe boxes and packs that are waiting for you, any number of which might have a card that you want in your future deck.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a hard conversation to have with a new player.
One thing that I think we talked about this potentially on the Sustainable LCG podcast that I'm a huge fan of for those kind of games is the World Champ decks are a great example to me. But imagining Netrunner right now, if every faction had a buyable $15 to $20 deck that you could actually go buy.
Yeah, we've seen these in Magic too, right? These pre-constructed.
Oh, yeah. And those were some of my favorite things.
And I know in Magic, or at least in Pokemon, they have the this is the World Champions deck, but not tournament legal because it's collectible, so we can't just give you all the best cards. And they have little things that shows that. Yeah. But in LCGs, I think that may be one of the best advantages is the reality of L5R in 2 years. You could have a deck for each clan. You walk in, it's like you can get in this game for $20.
Yeah.
That's
grab the deck and play in the tournament.
That's remarkable. Yeah. And then if you want depth, you can buy the rest of the product. But that's pretty cool.
That's definitely a good starting place. That's definitely a good starting point. Yeah.
I would be, and then every year you could have your big event. It's we're releasing the new starter decks, and it's you could even have a tournament format that is starter decks only.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's a lot of ways to go with that.
So why do games fail, Zach?
Games ultimately fail because they're adding less people than they're leaving.
That's it. So we need to fix that.
That is the problem to be solved.
And I'll tell you one thing.
On future topics.
Spoiler alert, I definitely don't think that it's on, and I say this a lot, but I definitely don't think that it's on the players to do that. There's, the number one concern of players is be welcoming and be a good human being. That's pretty much the onus that's on you.
I mean, I think if we're running it down, right, it's if game companies are sticking to if they're making great games and they're supporting it through the release of good products, if retailers are focused on building communities.
As they should be.
And if players are focused on being involved in those communities.
And loving the hobby.
That's really the ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, on to some questions. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We'll answer your questions right here on the show. First, of course, before we get to actual questions, we get to answers from past questions. So on episode 24, we asked a question. Alan Jones on YouTube says, besides meeting you guys at Gen Con.
Yeah, Alan's awesome.
I would say.
Saw him in the L5R line.
My big Gen Con memory was being able to judge for Kiku Matsuri and see the parade of samurai come in, followed by a 700-person Oots Bonsai. It almost made me cry as I felt that this was a moment in tabletop history for FFG and gaming in general. Now that you've had some time to look at cores and learn the game from Brad, do your clan affiliations hold, or did you find yourselves making a switch in clan loyalty? We got a question in the answer.
Yeah, it was perfect. We got bamboozled.
So I do want to note the Kiku Matsuri, that speaking of launches.
That Bonsai was awesome.
Going well. L5R did launch with a bang. I mean, they had the big 700-person tournaments. The Oots Bonsai was very emotional. Steve dedicating that to his friend, and that was just a very touching moment. You have everyone screaming bonsai. It was very powerful. But to answer the question from the answer, my clan affiliation has promptly switched. I was looking at Phoenix. They very much feel more nuanced as a clan, and I definitely am still very interested. But out of the gate, they're just it feels like the faction or clan that doesn't quite have everything they need yet. From my short experiences so far, I'm heavy into dragons right now, though. That was my secondary choice.
Wicked. Okay. So I was starting out lion, and I'm moving to unicorn and curious about Phoenix.
You do feel like a little bit of a Phoenix.
Yeah.
The water guy in unicorn get you
you
saw the art, and he was just like, "What is this?"
Just destroyed me, and I love it. I like movement and that kind of thing. So. We'll see.
Did your stick so far?
Yeah, probably still dragon.
Still dragon.
Yeah.
All right, other answer from Michael Meinhardt on YouTube. Played in the Kiku Matsuri for L5R. Loved it. It's a very different game from AGs, but it still feels like L5R. Looking forward to hopefully being able to play Mantis again. I will be curious to see if they add the old Mantis clan.
That'd be cool. I guess the story will dictate, right?
We have some really good questions this episode.
Some heaters, right?
I will say, if you're listening, please leave a question. We would love to answer it on the show. And the questions like these that we're about to do are very solid. I saw the lineup right before the show, and I'm excited to answer them.
It's worth shouting out to David that he essentially asked a question about the community responsibility for industry developments, and it's essentially kind of what this episode turned out to be. So we kind of answered his in an entire episode.
Just straight up as the whole show. He didn't even know it. All right, so Ryan Krosky on YouTube said, can you please elaborate on what makes a good tournament game? You often cite length of rounds as being a detriment. In this episode, and this was last week's episode, you specifically mentioned the fact that L5R rounds would need to be around an hour as if it was a bad thing. Yet there are rounds of X-Wing, Netrunner, and even Destiny on this very channel, which take around 40 to 50 minutes to complete. Thanks for your passion for the community. Keep up the good work. Yeah, so a little elaboration on that, at least on my point. I think the even when we're talking about X-Wing, which is a game I love and have played many tournaments for, it is not the ideal tournament game for me. It is heavier. You're standing all day. It's 90-minute rounds.
You hear about that from so many players.
And
it's almost like a marathon.
It is
as opposed to
exhausting.
a fun event.
And so by like round 7 or 8 of Worlds, you're just like, it gets very intense. So I think that's what for me is like an ideal tournament game. And it's not to say that games that don't fit these can't be tournament games or can't be played, but they aren't ideal. Are games that take more than an hour per round, because that means I'm meeting a lot less opponents. That means I'm moving around a lot less. It means that exhaustion can set in. And it also means that if you have a large tournament, it's going to take a long time to play. So like L5R, a good example, if the rounds end up having to be an hour and a half, you're not standing. It's not as physically exhausting in that way.
But it is mentally exhausting.
But the truth is, if you have a 7-round Swiss tournament, it's going to take you 10, 11 hours to do that, and you're not even to the cut yet. Whereas Destiny, it's like 10-round tournament, 5 hours.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It is way better in that regard. And that says nothing about the quality of the game, but I think that for me, the shorter the round length to a point, the better it is for a tournament, and an hour is about where the curve switches.
Yeah. The shorter the round length and the kind of the way the mechanics are, right? So like a game of L5R is a much more dramatic experience to me than a game of Destiny. Right, like one of them is kind of like, woo, hey, we do this thing and it's really quick. That's Destiny. And then L5R is like, I can play one game of L5R and feel like I've just moved a mountain. Right, like I've kept track of every line of text on the board, which is ample. And then by the time the end of it, it's like another game, and then another game, and then another game. So there are mentally taxing games and there are complex games that a lot of people like. I don't think those are, as you said, ideal tournament games, unless you do kind of a shorter, more less, Swiss rounds and just kind of a more general tournament.
Yeah.
But I think also if you can play two games, like Netrunner, you get 2. You do Runner
In an
and
hour.
Corp.
Yeah.
Destiny, you do best 2 out of 3. The old Star Wars TCG, I think, was a good tournament game, best 2 out of 3. If you can play more than one round to mitigate lucky draws and things, I think you get a better tournament.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think that nails it on the head. Sandwich on YouTube has a question.
Sandwike.
Sandwike? I just read sandwich straight up. Sandwike. He specifically points me out. Zach, at one point in the podcast, says that he wouldn't play a game as long or complex as L5R in a tournament setting, instead preferring the simplicity of games like Destiny, which allow for A, more games, and B, less mental fatigue after a number of rounds.
Right out of the mouth of babes. There.
This statement alone isn't really controversial. It makes sense and is an opinion probably held by a good number of CCG and LCG players. The thing is, you guys also made a point of highlighting how the main thing L5R does different, and ideally better, is organized play. Obviously, you can see a problem. So, ask Covenant, how does a game that produces that kind of dichotomy between mechanics and metagame succeed, and is it even a problem? And I think this goes straight back to when we started talking about prizes in tabletop, which is, to me, there is a difference between tournament and organized play.
Absolutely.
And so when I'm thinking about L5R, the reality of would I be willing to show up to an event, I won't even say tournament, that is 4 rounds. It's not about a cut and the player that wins, and maybe you still have a cut, maybe not. But it is about, whichever clan today could win with the most honor. I would love to show up for that event.
Yeah.
Do I want to show up for a 10-round cut to top 16 L5R tournament where I'm trying to play 40 hours in 2 days? Not as exciting.
Yeah.
And so that's where I do get excited about L5R, because I'm hopeful that it is less about the tournament and more about the experience of the game, the community, the theme, the story, and the general enjoyment of the hobby versus just a tournament game.
I would certainly love it if I could come into an L5R event, play 2 to 3 games, feel like I contributed to something for my clan, and then relax the rest of the day and just talk shop and that kind of thing, right? Yeah, I totally agree. Organized play and tournaments are entirely different.
Yeah.
That's just the most important thing that we need to drill.
I think tournaments can be a part of organized play.
Yeah.
For sure.
But they are not organized play. That's the biggest distinction for me. And so I'm hopeful, and there will definitely be tournaments for L5R, no doubt. But I'm way more excited about what else can be done there. Third and final question from Jeremy Springer on Facebook. I was so anxious to hear the reports on L5R from y'all. You sounded so pumped for it before the con. Felt like the wind was let out of the sails or something. Maybe I didn't listen well enough. This is, I think, last week's Gen Con recap. To what you were saying, but didn't seem too thrilled with it after Gen Con. I was following most of it throughout the 4 days and found nothing but excitement. 700-person events, sold out crazy fast. Secondary market for promos is huge. The hype is, for most, is still really big. Am I just reading into it, or are you guys really not that excited about it right now?
Well, for me, a lot of my particular excitement was twofold. One was that I was actually feeling quite awful on the podcast last week, so I was a little subdued.
You were sick, yeah.
But more specifically, whenever this was our first look at the game, this is the first time we actually got to buy some core sets from the booth. And so we hadn't played, we didn't really know. And so when I'm in the early phases of a game, like any relationship, I'm incredibly critical and evaluating every little thing and saying, could this be a problem for me? Maybe I wouldn't like this about it. I do like this part, but this part doesn't look as polished. So it's a lot of thinking about, is this a good fit? Do I like this game? These kinds of things. It's a very dynamic process up front. I try to not let excitement get in the way of actual analysis of what's going on with the mechanics and the theme and are they playing together correctly. But now having gotten past that and now playing L5R in a much more realistic way with multiple core sets and building decks and those kinds of things, I'm really amped for where this game goes. I think it hits a certain kind of audience and I don't want to hide that from people. I think that this is a game that requires a whole lot of attention. It's a game with a lot of text on the board. I was noticing that particularly last night. A lot of decisions to be made. A monumental amount of decisions to be made in any given turn, in any given round. And there are a large number of players that are going to love that. And I'm glad. And I'm glad if you're that player, and I'm kind of dip into that player on and off, you're going to love it. And I think that I will ultimately love the game every once in a while. But when it comes to the complexity of it, the reality of that, I was telling you, knowing every card is going to be critical in L5R. It is a game that revolves around a ton of hidden information happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
You have 6 cards, I have 6 cards. We can play all of them potentially at the same conflict window. And so, you pump your strength 3, I pump mine 2, you change the conflict type, I move your character out, you bow my character, I discard yours. None of that I can prepare for going in.
Particularly when you've never seen any of the cards of your opponents, right? Like when you were playing against Dragon for the first time, and it's like, there's actually a limitless number of things I could be doing.
Just a complete amount of unknowns. Yeah. And so that makes me crazy. I can't stand that kind of stuff. So as you learn the game more, and you got to learn the cards and just understand what are the unknowns that I have to potentially anticipate. And if you're into that, then good on you. But I guarantee a lot of new players, you need to know that it's going to feel weird until you know what's possible in the game. Because there are some things that you would imagine were impossible that suddenly are being done, and you say, this is insane. How could I ever have anticipated that?
And I think there are definitely players that are more and less comfortable with that concept.
Yeah.
Right. It's the difference between playing chess or poker is what I was saying, which is in poker, there's a lot of unknowns. The first time you ever played poker, the reality of knowing the hands, knowing what's possible, knowing what the odds are, all that is not there. But I also think, you're on that podcast in particular, you're getting a look at a moment that we haven't historically done, where if you had talked to us about Destiny a couple days after our first demo, or even people coming up to Gen Con last year asking me, what do you think about Destiny? It's very careful and very cautious at that point because we haven't fully evaluated it yet. We can't really give an opinion, a full opinion, and we don't want to recommend a game to someone who we shouldn't be recommending it for, or get people excited and then be let down by that. So I would say I'm still cautiously optimistic, and we're diving in and we're playing a lot more, and we're getting our hands on it. And the thing I'm most excited about and will continue to be most excited about is seeing what L5R can do differently from an organized play standpoint, as opposed to an actual mechanical game standpoint.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Robert, thumbs up, nods head. All right, thank you all so much for listening. Again, you can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We'd love to answer your questions on the show. And we have a question for you to answer in the comments, which is, what do you think makes a tabletop game most successful? Until next time, keep playing.